commitment to our Constitution and our nation's security.
Ours too.
Thank you. Yeah. I have shown throughout my almost 22 years of service in the military, as well as my time in Congress, how seriously I take the privilege of having access to classified information and our nation's secrets. And that's why I'm committed, if confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, to join you in making sure that there is no future Snowden-type leak. And I would do so by taking 4 specific actions. Number 1, again, to make sure that there are no illegal and unconstitutional programs. Limiting in a big way those who have access to our nation's top secrets through security clearance reform, making sure that every single person in the workforce knows about the legal whistleblower channels available to them, and making sure that there's a direct line available to me should anyone have concerns. If people choose to step outside of those legal channels to raise any concerns about programs or actions that exist within the intelligence community that are classified, there will be no excuse to do so, and they should be charged and prosecuted under the law.
Was he a traitor at the time when he took America's secrets, released them in public into China, and became a Russian citizen?
Senator, I'm focused on the future and how we can prevent something like this from happening again.
So you would have the responsibility to be able to give counsel to the president, which is a great privilege. You already have his ear, quite frankly, and y'all have a great relationship on that, which is very beneficial. But when President Trump chose to take the strike on Soleimani, he was also at that same time going through an impeachment in the House. And you were kind of tough on him at the time about that. You called it a declaration of war. You said that the Soleimani strike will lead to an outcome that will further undermine our national security. As a member of Congress, I also take seriously declaration of war and our responsibility in that. He was acting in a way that he came out and the intelligence gave that Soleimani was in the process of preparing a strike on American citizens and those folks that were in the field at the time. I guess the question that I have is, the ODNI will sit with the president, will provide options to the president and say, here are the options that you could take. Would you have presented a Soleimani strike at that time, looking back at it now in retrospect and saying this is an option you could take and here's how to be able to do it?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. It's an important question. If confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, I would make sure that the president has all of the objective analysis and intelligence reporting so that he can make that best informed decision, including all of the options and actions that he has available to him, which should exist alongside an assessment of what the possible repercussions or responses to those actions may be. My own personal views have no place in that assessment and that providing to the president and his advisors with all of those options available.
Thank you, Senator Langford. Senator Bannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to repeat my colleague's question to you. Thank you for being here to answer these questions and for your service. Was Edward Snowden a traitor to the United States of America?
Senator, I will also repeat my answer. He broke the law.
You said earlier that you were offended by a question that my colleague from Kansas asked, which I think was his duty as somebody on this committee to fulfill his responsibility to advise and consent. We are not here to be a rubber stamp for the President of the United States. So let me ask you again, do you believe, as the chairman of this committee believes, as the vast majority of members of our intelligence agencies believe, that Edward Snowden was a traitor to the United States of America?
Senator, if confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, I will work with you to make sure that there is not another Snowden-like leak.
It's not a moment to propagate theories, conspiracy theories, or attacks on journalism in the United States. This is when you need to answer the questions of the people whose votes you're asking for to be confirmed as the chief intelligence officer of this nation. As my colleague said, this is not about you. It's about the people that serve the intelligence agencies of the United States. Is Edward Snowden a traitor to the United States of America? That is not a hard question to answer when the stakes are this high?
Senator, as someone who
If
has
your
served
answer,
in
yes or no, is Edward Snowden a traitor to the United States of America?
as someone who
I'll
has
go on
worn
to
our
my
uniform
questions. Did
in
this
combat,
did-
I understand how critical our national security
Apparently
is.
you don't. Apparently you don't. Let me ask you. I've worked very hard to put your own words here in front of the committee. Not, fake news, not conspiracy theories on the internet, but the actual things that you have said. On February 23rd, 2022, at the very moment that Russian tanks were rolling across the peaceful border of Ukraine for the first time, you tweeted at 11:30 p.m. your time, "This war and suffering could have easily been avoided if Biden administration / NATO had simply acknowledged Russia's legitimate security concerns regarding Ukraine's becoming a member of NATO." Did you say that, yes or no?
I believe you're reading my tweet, Senator.
Yes is the answer. A few months later, you said on your podcast, and I quoted it, quote, "But this regime change war against Russia that the U.S. and NATO are waging via their proxy in Ukraine didn't begin when Putin invaded Ukraine. They had their eyes set on this objective long before that." Did you say that, yes or no?
I believe you're reading my tweet.
Thank
There's
you.
a
The
lot
answer
more.
is yes.
You're quoting a podcast that
I'm
provided
happy
much
to have
more
a conversation
context.
with the chairman about whether I'm taking anything out of context. I don't think I am. And your answer is yes. Are you aware that your comments about proxy wars and Russia's legitimate security concerns, to quote your own words, are in alignment with what the Russians have said to justify their invasion of Ukraine? Yes or
Senator,
no?
I don't pay attention to Russian
So I'll
propaganda.
take
My
that as
goal is to
I'll
speak
take
the
that as
truth,
the answer is no.
regardless of whether
Thank
you like it or
I'll
not.
take it. That's fine. You said you are used to speaking truth to power.
Yes.
I'm shocked to hear you now say that you are agreeing. I'm not shocked because I know you said it. You are agreeing that you basically said that Putin was justified in rolling over the peaceful border of Ukraine, the first time since World War II that a free nation had been invaded by a totalitarian state. And you were there at 11:30 p.m. that night to say that you were with them, not us. And let me tell you something. You say you don't know because you don't read Russian propaganda. Russian state TV then aired your comments. Did you know that?
Senator, I think you should also quote the statement that I made criticizing Putin for his invasion
What
of
I would say, Mr. Chairman, with the last, it's up to all of us. We're the Senate. We get to decide whether we're going to confirm this nominee. Obviously, we didn't select this nominee. But can't we do better than somebody who doesn't believe in 702? Can't we believe that somebody who can't answer whether Snowden was a traitor 5 times today, who made excuses for Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, the first time that I'm aware of any American official has done that? I'm questioning her judgment. That's the issue that's at stake here. And as you said, and I totally agree, this is about our intelligence officers. And you cannot answer. Most of what we do here is in secret. This is one of the very few opportunities that you will ever have to have a conversation with this panel in public. And the record is going to be very clear about the position you took with regard to Edward Snowden. And the record is going to be very clear about your reaffirmation of the statements you made in the middle of the night when Russia was invading the free country of Ukraine. And I hope we will take that in consideration when we have this vote.
Your time has expired. I will note that during Senator Bennett's question and answer, there was 2 disturbances in the room. The first sounded like a cell phone. I would ask everyone on both sides of the dais, if you have not silenced or turned off your cell phone, please do so now. The second disturbance was the cries of a small child. We will will welcome such disturbances because the cries of an infant are the sound of answered prayers. Senator Rounds.
Not only here, but the answered prayers in church when they cry as well, Mr. Chairman. First of all, thank you for your service to our country. I think part of the discussion here, as you can see, we feel very, very strongly about FISA 702. We work with it literally every day. As you can also tell, we have some very, very strong feelings here with regard to the actions of Edward Snowden. I want to come back, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to make any corrections or to make any other comments with regard to both of those issues that have been brought up here. But before I get into that, I want to go back into a little bit of your previous history as well. You did serve as you served as a congressperson for, 8 years?
Yes, Senator.
And during that time, you served on the Armed Services Committee. And during that time period, you did carry a TSSCI clearance. You worked your way through that time period. You had an opportunity to look at a lot of information. Can you share just a little bit about the way that you've looked at that, not just as a member of the congressional delegation from Hawaii, but also during the time in which you were a lieutenant colonel serving up through and including a battalion commander? Talk about that a little bit, please.
Thank you, Senator, for your question. In both of those roles, I had exposure to different sides of how critical our national security is and the unique role that our intelligence community plays in ensuring our national security. My most recent deployment with the military was as part of a joint special operations task force to Djibouti and Somalia, where our mission was to support the Somalis government and military's focus on defeating al-Shabaab, which is al-Qaeda's element there within East Africa. One of the things that we came across there that I hadn't known previously, even served in Congress for 8 years because it hadn't been focused on, was how al-Shabaab specifically was the biggest funder of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which again should be of unique concern and interest to our own national security concerns. Being able to engage with world leaders in both capacities, in uniform and as a member of Congress, being a customer of intelligence in both of those roles gives me a unique perspective, if confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, to come in with fresh eyes, to come in with some of the frustrations that I experienced as a member of Congress with the lack of information that we received from the intelligence community, oftentimes feeling as though everything we heard in a brief could have been read in the newspaper that morning, and the essential oversight role that all of you play here in Congress. You are unable to do so unless you are equipped with that intelligence and information. I'm committed to fulfilling that responsibility if confirmed as Director of National Intelligence.
Okay, now, when you and I first met, I told you that I thought you needed to kind of take a change in the direction that you were going with regard to how you were approaching the private conversations, and that we wanted you to sit down and meet with some folks who were directly involved in gathering the intelligence and so forth. You did that.
Yes.
And then we came back and we sat back down again. And what those individuals who I had talked to and I asked you to talk with shared with me that they thought that you were a quick study and that you had the opportunity to look at a number of the issues that this committee considers to be extremely sensitive, and 702 in particular. Now, I've got about a minute left, but I want to give you an opportunity in front of this committee to share your position in your own words about how strong or how much it is needed with regard to the continuation of 702 and your support for it.
Thank you, Senator. 702 provides a unique security tool and capability that is essential for our national security. There are a number of areas that we would be blind from a national security perspective without this capability. It also must exist next to having safeguards in place to ensure Americans' civil liberties are protected. As you know, Senator, it is illegal under 702 to target any U.S. person. There are several other sections within FISA that speak to some of the civil liberties reforms that you all passed in last year's legislation.
Finish with this. 702 in its current form stays in effect for the next year. You would agree that there were reforms made which fixed a number of the items that you had a problem with in the first place. Is that correct?
It's correct, Senator, and some of those reforms that you enacted were specific to some of the legislation that I introduced back when I was in Congress, such as prohibiting the abouts collection as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Gabbard, for your service, both in Congress and in our U.S. military. I want to talk to you a little bit about your perspectives on China. How do you view China in your national security role?
Our relationship with China is one that is complex, given how closely our economies are linked. There are a number of challenges and threats that need to be navigated with respect to China, some of which most recently with this very serious cyber exploitation in Salt Typhoon and Volt Typhoon that seemingly took us by surprise, and the compromising of our major telecom companies and an area of significant and great concern.
So some of your past statements that are relevant to China are concerning because I don't think it fully appreciates China's perspective towards the United States. For example, with regard to TikTok. Your past statements have essentially said that requiring domestic ownership of TikTok is a violation of civil liberties, and the national security concerns are complete BS. Can you explain why you have this view on TikTok?
The position that I previously made, obviously not as a member of Congress, the TikTok legislation, were centered around the protection of Americans' First Amendment rights and the lack of data privacy legislation, frankly, that would apply to TikTok, Facebook, X, all of these different social media applications that collect on us, users of these applications. There were other provisions within that legislation that granted very vague and grandiose authorities to the president on deciding which private companies are or are not a national security threat.
So let's talk about China specifically, because this is where I want to make sure you understand what's at stake. We've had concerns over many years that when China owns infrastructure, it can manipulate that infrastructure. It can use it for spying. It could use it turn it on or off. And you've actually addressed some of the most recent cyber attacks that we believe China had relevant participation. The challenge is if China owns TikTok, it means they can spy on the United States, on the American people. It can take all the data from our children. It can change the narrative about what people are talking about through their algorithms. If it wants to create misinformation or malign foreign influence, it's very easy. So can you understand why it's so important that we require domestic ownership of TikTok?
I understand the concern, Senator. I would just reiterate some of my concerns that I stated in the past about how this really is an issue about data privacy, because so much of what is collected by all of these, even U.S.-owned companies, can be sold to any country.
I get it, and that is a bigger issue for Congress to wrestle, and I am all in for that conversation. But I want you to appreciate China. What is your view with regard to Taiwan? Do you think it is something that your intelligence efforts will understand how important our relationship is with Taiwan, specifically on chips manufacturing? I think President Trump has most recently decided to have a 100% tariff on all chips from Taiwan. And your statements, particularly about the bill we passed, the CHIPS Act, to make sure that domestic production is invested in, and so that we have that supply chain, and so we have that national security. But your public statements about the CHIPS Act have been very negative and don't seem to appreciate how important that independence is for our national security, to be beholden to China, to be beholden to Taiwan, to be in a place where we can't do our own national intelligence.
Yes, Senator, I fully support the investment in building and strengthening our own domestic capabilities. If I recall, that legislation had a lot of other provisions in it that had nothing to do with the production of our own capability, and I felt were a distraction away from and a potential obstacle towards achieving that.
So you will recommend to the president that we continue to invest in the semiconductor industry in the United States for our own independence as well as our own national security?
Yes, Senator, and I would base my recommendations on a number of all of these issues, if confirmed as D&I, based on the full assessment of the intelligence picture so the president understands the ramifications and the potential cost towards any one of these policy positions that he will make and all of you will make.
And last, I want to return to the Soleimani strike. At the time, you said it was illegal, that President Trump did was illegal, would cause very significant problems down the line. What is your position on that strike, and will you be able to advise the president in future issues with regard to national security?
Those broader issues that I raised with regard to war powers, I have been consistent on. I didn't have access to all of the information behind that strike at the time, and my concerns were that that may be an escalatory action. President Trump was right. There was no escalation beyond that, and his policies towards Iran turned out to be very effective for our own national security.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand.
Do you disagree with the president taking away the protection for those who are now being targeted in retaliation for the Soleimani strike, such as previous Secretary Pompeo?
Senator, I can't answer that without being able to look at the intelligence assessment and the threat assessment for that or other decisions.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. Senator Young.
Tulsi, good to see you. We had a nice visit in the office.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here today. It was clear from that visit in the office that we share a lot of concerns about ill-advised foreign regime change interventions, about the weaponization in certain instances of our domestic law enforcement and intel authorities. Let me talk about something, Edward Snowden, on which we may not agree. It's been recognized he fled overseas with the numbers 1.5 million classified documents. He shared them with the press. He absconded to China and Russia. Do you have any response to the bipartisan findings of the House Intel Committee, which stated that, quote, Snowden caused tremendous damage to national security, unquote, including to military, defense, and intelligence programs of great interest to America's adversaries? I'll give you an opportunity to respond, hopefully briefly.
Thank you, Senator. As I've said before, Edward Snowden broke the law, and I do not agree with how he chose to release information and the extent of the information and intelligence that he released. It's my focus on the future, and I think we can all agree that we do not want to have another Snowden-type leak, and I've laid out specific actions, if confirmed as D&I, to do that.
Okay. Well, it's notable you didn't say, yes, he clearly hurt in various ways our national security. The same House committee also reported that based on DoD assessments, should the Chinese or Russians access certain documents relating to DoD capabilities that we know Snowden stole, quote, American troops will be at greater risk in any future conflict, unquote. Do you have any reflection on this assessment?
I would be very concerned about that. I have not had access to the information or intelligence that led to that assessment, but anything that puts our men and women in uniform unnecessarily at risk should be a grave concern.
Yeah. I share that sentiment as a former Marine Corps intelligence officer. When we find that Americans, whether private citizens or contractors or uniformed personnel, have shared sensitive designs about military technology or plans to a foreign government, however well-intentioned, we rightfully throw the book at them. Snowden did just that, yet you have argued and many times that he should be pardoned. You introduced legislation, as has been discussed here. He's been able to publicly hide, as I see it, behind this facade of being a so-called whistleblower. But he likely endangered American lives through his actions. So as the leader of the intelligence community, how would you how would you think you would be received based on some of these past actions to support or even to pardon Edward Snowden? Rank and
Senator,
file intelligence analysts and intelligence professionals. How do you think it'll be received?
I'm grateful, Senator, to have received letters of endorsement and support from many current and former individuals who've worked within the intelligence community, those who've worked or are still working within our military, because I believe they trust that my goal, my sole goal and interest is in our nation's security and upholding our oath to the Constitution. And they trust that if confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, I will take the very specific steps that I have laid out in informing every single person within the intelligence community about the legal pathways they have to blow the whistle or to bring any concerns to the forefront, to include coming directly to members of Congress, to limit access so that we don't have people who are E3s or E4s or people in any situation taking it upon themselves to release classified information, giving them a direct line to me to once again make sure that we are all fulfilling our responsibility to ensure our national security and uphold our Constitution.
Thank you. Tulsi, was Edward Snowden false to an obligation or false to a duty?
I don't understand what you're saying. False?
Yes. Did he betray a duty? But did he betray the trust of the American people? Which is, according to Merriam-Webster, that's the definition of a traitor.
Edward Snowden broke the law, and he released this information in a way that he should not have. He also acknowledged and exposed information that was unconstitutional, which drove a lot of the reforms that this body has made over the years to make sure that Americans' constitutional rights are protected.
For what it's worth, Mr. Snowden is watching these proceedings. He's posted on social media even, indicating that Tulsi Gabbard should indicate that I harmed national security. This may be the rare instance in which I agree with Mr. Snowden. I think it would befit you and be helpful to the way you are perceived by members of the intelligence community if you would at least acknowledge that the greatest whistleblower in American history, so-called, harmed national security by breaking the laws of the land around our intel.
Thanks, Senator Young. Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to first say thank you for your service to this country.
Likewise.
In Congress and in the Army, and thank you for meeting with me a couple of weeks ago, and thank you for being here today. You're nominated to lead and coordinate across the intelligence community's numerous sources of collection and analytic capabilities. In a few sentences, can you describe how you make assessments and how you're going to sift through all this intelligence and make careful and thoughtful conclusions?
Yes, Senator, there are great professionals who work within the intelligence community. I will build a strong team around me as they present the intelligence reporting, provide to the President through the President's daily brief, and to respond to issues and concerns that this body has. I will welcome dissenting voices to be able to make sure that this information intelligence is thoroughly vetted prior to presenting it, and make sure that the truth is reported, whether that truth is convenient or not.
Well, thank you, Colonel Gabbard, and I appreciate that. The President and others are going to rely on that. I want to discuss such an assessment made by the IC. For years, the U.S. analyzed evidence of numerous chemical weapons attacks in Syria. Eventually, we were able to assess that Bashar al-Assad was responsible for a number of these attacks that slaughtered his own civilians. Do you accept the conclusion broadly that Assad used chemical weapons against Syrians?
Yes, and I'm on the record for years of agreeing with that broad assessment.
Thank you. Among the attacks the U.S. assessed Assad was responsible for, two that occurred in Douma and Khan Sheikhoun in Syria. As a member of Congress and as a presidential candidate, and as recently as this month, in your written responses to this committee, you have cast doubt on the assessment that Assad is culpable in these two attacks. Is that still your position?
Senator, I raised those questions given conflicting information and evidence that was presented at that time.
Well, thank you. So, to help inform the public, the Trump administration released declassified intelligence in 2017 and again in 2018, showing how experts analyzed multiple types of evidence, satellite imagery, medical experts' witnesses, describing sources and showing the reasoning used to determine Assad's culpability in using these chemical weapons, including in Douma and Khan Sheikhoun, in these attacks, the ones that you question. I have two documents I want to submit for the record, Mr. Chairman.
Admitted.
Thank you. Were you aware of the declassified assessments, the one I referenced?
Yes, I was.
And as a member of the House Armed Services Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee, did you take time to review these?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And can you explain to me then why you doubted the intelligence community's conclusions in these two cases, Douma and Khan Sheikhoun, but not the others? And please be specific.
These two cases were being looked at to be used as a pretext for major military movement, and my fear was a repeat of the deployment of another 500,000 soldiers like we saw in Iraq towards what was the Obama administration's goal, which was regime change in Syria. The